This is probably the strangest full-size Pontiac of the late 60s. A 1969 Parisienne, a Canadian hybrid of Pontiac and Chevrolet with a huge 427 V8 under the hood. Today, we're doing a full walk-around of this rare Canadian Pontiac. We'll look at how it's put together, why it sits on a Chevrolet chassis, and how that big 427 completely changes the character of this convertible. Stick around till the end, and I'll tell you how rare this 427 Parisienne really is, what collectors are paying for them today, and whether it still makes sense to hunt one down. To understand what makes this car special, we need to step back for a moment, to Canada in the late 60s. The Pontiac Parisienne wasn't just another full-size Pontiac. In Canada, it sat a rung below the American market Bonneville and Catalina, and mechanically, it was closer to a Chevrolet Impala than to the wide-track American Pontiacs. It was a clever mix. Pontiac styling and image on the outside, but Chevrolet chassis and engines underneath to work around local taxes and production rules. In the US, Pontiac was advertising its famous wide track, a wider stance that made the cars look and feel broader and more planted. Canadians, meanwhile, got the so-called narrow track Pontiacs, the same basic look, but with a narrower track and Chevy running gear. Most Parisiennes left the factory with modest 283, 307, or 350 Chevrolet V8s, honest workhorse engines without much drama. This particular car, with a 427 V8, is a completely different story. If you enjoy these lesser-known side branches of GM history, that's exactly what this channel is about. And now, let's take a look at the actual survivor sitting right in front of us. And by the way, so you have something to compare this Canadian on a Chevy chassis with, you can check out my video on the 1969 Chevrolet Caprice 427, luxury and power at an affordable price, later on. I'll put a card to it on screen around here. Feel free to save it to watch after this video. From the front, you absolutely can't mistake this Pontiac for anything else. For 1969, it got this controversial but unforgettable nose, the trademark Pontiac arrowhead hood, and a flexible insert in the middle of the bumper. Pontiac promoted that flexible bumper section as a way to shrug off low-speed bumps without leaving a mark, and on the GTO, it looked aggressive and well integrated. On a full-size car like the Parisienne, they pulled that beak so far forward that it started to look like a flexible cartilage nose, the kind of detail people either fall in love with or walk away from immediately. Move off to the side, and the profile is a completely different story. The beltline gently dips down toward the front door, then sweeps up around the rear quarter window and settles down again toward the tail. It's that classic Coke bottle shape, where the body is pinched slightly in the middle and then swells out again over the rear wheels. Take a look at the rear wheel. It's noticeably tucked inboard, and if you line it up against the wheel opening, you can see it sits closer to the front edge of the arch rather than perfectly centered. That's a direct result of the Chevrolet chassis. The wheelbase and track don't line up perfectly with the Pontiac body, and when the car is parked, it looks a bit odd. From the rear three-quarter, the Parisienne calms down. The tail tapers into the bumper with a smooth wedge shape, and the narrow taillights droop down at the outer edges, giving the car a kind of sleepy-eyed look. Viewed straight from behind, you can see how the designers tried to make the car appear as wide as possible. The taillights stretch almost from edge to edge, and the trunk lid and quarter panels sit on nearly the same flat plane, with no sharp creases. Down at the bottom of the bumper, there are two elongated slots. Those aren't drain holes, they're the attachment points for the factory bumper jack, a very period-correct solution. In just a minute, we'll step inside and you'll see what late 60s North American luxury looked like from the driver's seat. Inside, the Parisienne keeps playing that double game. At first glance, you see Pontiac, the big arrowhead emblem on the steering wheel, the wood-look trim, the wide seats. But if you look more closely, the details start to betray its Chevrolet roots. The instrument panel is slightly angled toward the driver, with a classic horizontal speedometer and big, simple controls. There's less heavy chrome here than in the early 60s, more plastic, more faux wood, but for the late decade, this was the new standard of affordable luxury. The steering wheel is a great example of this mix. In the center, there's a Pontiac badge, but the shape of the rim and the steering column look very much like a same-era Chevrolet. The shift lever and the pedal set are the same story. Mechanics in Canada quickly learned that under the Pontiac skin, they were basically working on a Chevy, and appreciated how easy that made servicing the car. The gauge cluster is quite minimal. Instead of a full set of individual gauges, you get a group of warning lights. Instead of separate needles for temperature, oil pressure, and charging, you get a systems block of idiot lights that comes on when something goes wrong. At the time, that was seen as a modern, simplified solution for the average owner, but enthusiasts have always preferred proper gauges to tell them what's happening before a light comes on. The seats are wide and soft, true sofa-on-wheels furniture. These aren't seats for attacking a mountain road. They're built for relaxed highway cruising and long-distance comfort. The front row is roomy, but in the back there's a bit less space than the exterior length suggests. Wide side panels, wheel arches, and the tapering rear body eat into rear leg and shoulder room. If you enjoy deep dives into forgotten North American luxury cars like this, you might already want to consider subscribing. There are plenty more rare Chevrolets and Pontiacs from this era coming. Now we get to the main reason a lot of people clicked on this video. Under the hood of this Parisienne lives that big Chevrolet 427 V8. Most Parisiennes left the factory with much more modest engines, 283, 307, or 350 cubic inches. For a family full-size convertible, that was enough. The car moved along smoothly, without much drama. Here it's a different story. The 427 is a big block, and it completely changes the car's character. Depending on the exact version, these engines made serious power and torque for the time, and were usually associated with more expensive models or performance-oriented cars. In terms of feel, a small block gives a calm, even sort of acceleration. The car just pulls, and that's it. The 427 makes things noticeably more emotional. This heavy body starts to move with real authority even from low revs, and the sound of the V8 stops being background noise and becomes part of the car's personality. There are no illusions about fuel economy. A big block wants its share of fuel, especially around town. But back then, buyers of cars like this often cared more about smoothness, torque, and the ability to tow a boat or trailer than about saving money at the pump. And if you want to see what the original donor for this story looked like, a full-size Chevrolet with a 427 big block, check out my video on the 1969 Chevrolet Caprice 427, luxury and power at an affordable price after this one. It's the same big block idea, but without the Pontiac wrapper, a pure Chevy take on luxury and power. A bit later, I'll tell you how rare this exact Parisienne configuration is, and what collectors on both sides of the border are willing to pay for it today. From a collector's point of view, cars like this are interesting for three main reasons: origin, configuration, and survival. First, origin. This is a Canadian market Pontiac built on a Chevrolet chassis. From the start, these were produced in smaller numbers than the mainstream American full-size Pontiacs, and a portion of them went overseas as kits for local assembly, to places like New Zealand or South Africa, where they were built up locally and adapted to local conditions. There weren't many of these cars to begin with, and every one that's been lost over the decades makes the survivors that much more interesting. Second, configuration. Most buyers went for the smaller engines. Fuel has traditionally been more expensive in Canada than in most U.S. states, so people tended to choose economy over outright power. As a result, Parisiennes with big blocks, 396s and 427s, made up only a small percentage of total production, especially when you factor in convertibles and higher trim versions like the 2+2 with a factory 427. Third, survival. These cars rarely went straight into collections. They lived regular family car lives, hauling people on snowy roads, pulling trailers, sitting outside through harsh winters. The examples that have survived to today in solid, unmolested condition are minor miracles. Looking at the market, prices depend heavily on condition and options. A basic Parisienne with a small block and an automatic in driver quality condition might sell for roughly what a comparable Chevy of the era brings, sometimes a bit more because of the uniqueness. The rare 427 cars, especially 2+2s without serious rust, are in a different category. They're the ones people actively hunt for, not just pick from a list. They can bring money comparable to, or even higher than, some American full-size Pontiacs, especially when the car has good documentation. Let me know in the comments what you'd rather have in your own collection. A 1969 Parisienne with a 427 like this, or a same-year Cadillac or Lincoln in similar condition. In the end, this 1969 Pontiac Parisienne with a 427 V8 proves several things at once. First, a so-called cut-down Pontiac for the Canadian market can end up being more interesting to an enthusiast than many higher-status models, because it combines Pontiac styling with Chevrolet hardware. Second, these brand hybrids, born out of taxes, quotas, and cost-cutting, often become the most intriguing chapters in automotive history. They live at the crossroads between worlds and don't fit neatly into marketing charts. And finally, that big 427 under the hood turns this car from a simple, stylish cruiser into a true full-size sleeper, one that can move far harder than its laid-back looks would ever suggest. If you like stories about forgotten luxury from General Motors and about honest, slightly odd cars like this, don't forget to subscribe. There are already videos on other big GM platforms on the channel, and many more rare Chevrolets and Pontiacs with big blocks and interesting backstories are coming. And if you want to see the original donor for this whole story, a full-size Chevrolet with a big block from the same year, be sure to watch my video 1969 Chevrolet Caprice 427, Luxury and Power at an Affordable Price. You should see the link on screen right now. If you're into the later era of big North American luxury, check out the playlist with my videos on large GM cars from the 70s and early 80s. Pick a video on the end screen and keep traveling through this era.